Hello and welcome to the Forgeborn Finishing School. I'm Kckid and I'll be analyzing Forgeborn battles to help take your game to the next level. Today we have none other than the star of Something's Fizzlin, my favorite episodic piece of Solforge content, Fizzlesticks himself. How are you doing tonight, Cody?
Oof, that's some high praise coming into this one.
Well, to be fair, I mean, I love it when someone gets on like a little bit of a box and just takes a stance and is open to the world, open to criticism. Hey, this is what I believe, and here's all my facts and supporting evidence, and just lets it all out there. I really appreciate that part of your guys' show.
Yeah, it's something I think I need to just put more thought into doing more of them because we haven't done one in a while. But yeah, with that intro, I'll definitely be cooking up a new one. I got plenty of takes that are awful that I can just talk for hours on.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, certainly. One thing, just playing in the back here, I couldn't think of a better match to throw in the background of this video than Fizzlesticks himself crushing one of my Dizzying decks with his very own variant of DJ Drix and the Funky Bunch. Just played that episode. You have a very similar deck, so that's going to play in the background for our viewers as they listen to our conversation here.
Perfect. Well, that deck combination, that fuse, was inspired by you. That's almost too light of a word. It was almost straight up plagiarized by some of the things that you've talked to me about and mentioned that you think are strong. And then I tested out some of those concepts. I'm like, yeah, he's right. This is really good. Played in that tournament. It worked out pretty well for me.
Well, it's funny how, like, kind of the full circle here. So you being here on the show, I do want to bring up, like, one of my, I would say, maybe it's more like a life goal for me or a way I tackle life, right? So if you want to get better at this game or anything else, and that's why I say kind of a life theory, the way I tackle life, is you need to find people that have qualities that you want to emulate, right? Then you watch, you learn, and you ask questions. So, Cody, you've been one of those people from the second time I played you. I decided, okay, it's important to analyze your playstyle, analyze your deck building choices, and I knew that there was things I could learn from you. So it's kind of funny that we've come full circle here just a little bit. I really appreciate that. That's high praise coming from you as well.
Yeah, I mean, and same back to you. I think I've mentioned it before on our podcast, but I remember the first time I played you, I was like, all right, I don't really know what he's playing here. I don't really understand it. It was Tempest Utera, and I hadn't really seen that be played competitively yet at that point. And then second turn of the second deck cycle, I'm sitting at negative health and the game's over. And immediately I was like, all right, this guy knows how to cook some interesting things. And that kind of has been a theme on all of our back and forths, is that you'll come up with some ideas and I'm like, I would have never thought of it that way, but now I have to test it. So I think it goes back and forth. We spark some interesting conversations between the two of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. Well, I do got to say, hey, thanks for coming on the channel. Obviously couldn't be more excited to have you here. Having had Drix recently on the channel, who's, the greatest ambassador for the game, now we get the other half of the charge-plated team, so thanks for coming on.
Oh, absolutely.
So I really wanted to just have you on, to share your insight, like just let your mind loose here on two main topics today. And those are play formats and then the meta, generally speaking. So just kind of stepping into that, as we're recording this, Origins Sealed actually just wrapped up. So, congratulations to Steven, aka Hellkite, taking first there. It was an awesome showing. There was a lot of really cool decks in that sealed pool. You and I, Cody, have both said how much we like sealed, how we really love playing that version of the game. So just go ahead and talk your thoughts on sealed as it currently stands, set 1, set 2, join together.
Sure. So in a theoretical sealed format where you could pick the pack, or just in general across both sets?
Just in general, obviously. Yeah, sorry, I should have said combined together, but like where we're at in the environment today, if you had set 1 or set 2, if there's any glaring differences or just sealed in general, I really, think they're fairly similar. I don't think you're going to have someone blow you out of the water if you're set 1 or set 2 or whatever. So just sealed as a whole.
I do think this game is uniquely positioned for sealed. In the sense that, you had Keyforge, which was an algorithmically generated deck game, or I should say is, still alive. That game is weird for me for sealed because you don't combine anything. It's just that, I think typically the tournaments I played in, it was you got 2 decks, you can pick between one of them. I can see that being a really big feels bad, where if both of them are just, either styles that you despise playing, or you think they're pretty subpar. I mean, that game had a kind of algorithm where you could see the relative strength of your deck. If you scan in both your decks and they're both pretty low on the totem pole, you're not feeling very good about that. So that doesn't feel good. Yeah. And then on the other side of the spectrum, where it's kind of you are actually picking individual cards and creating a deck out of that, I think that's a lot of work. That's a lot of brain power. Now, I had some friends that played the original Solforge where you did play that way for sealed, and they loved it. But for me, it was always like I'm just hunting for like 2 or 3 cards that I know work well in sealed, and I'm just trying to build around that. There wasn't actually a lot of adaptability in that game. It was more of just hunting for the same stuff, and kind of just working within that limited structure that you had for yourself. So this is a really unique game in between those two, where there is some crafting involved, and there are a decent amount of options, because right inside of one booster, it's not like you have a coin flip on what you're going to play. You have multiple different options on what you're going to play. But then in the same sense, it's not so much of a crafting a deck where you are literally grabbing individual cards, which again I think is just a lot of just mental thought before a tournament even starts. And takes a decent amount of time, and then B, I do think you can actually kind of hunt and I don't know, not really net deck, but like you can kind of force some pools to be in certain areas, knowing how many commons there are in the set and how many uncommons there are. So I'll start off with that statement of it's just in a nice, sweet middle spot for sealed of how much control you have over and how much like agency you have over your deck, while still giving you some agency for making it interesting.
Yeah, just a spoonful of chaos, but yeah, you still maintain a good bit of agency. Absolutely. That's why I like sealed, because you can't walk into it with a specific game plan. You can't say I've played this deck 40 times and I'm ready for every play line it has. You have to learn and develop the play lines as you go, which I think does reward knowledge and inherent skill pretty greatly. In Origins, we saw some of the top names that went into the sealed tournament kind of do pretty well, which wasn't necessarily unexpected, because I do think sealed definitely rewards skill to a pretty high degree.
Yeah, and I think it does reward skill a decent amount, but at the same time, I think a certain kind of player is not going to enjoy sealed, because you are at the whim of the pack you open, right? There is some limited amount of agency. And even though it does take a large amount of skill to, first of all, potentially play with a suboptimal deck, almost guaranteed to play with a suboptimal deck, but maybe suboptimal compared to your opponent. But then just make sure you're squeezing the most out of your pack, and then ultimately out of the fuse deck. I do think that's skillful, but at the same time, there is a chance somebody high rolls over you, right? And it could feel like, well, I played excellent at my deck, but I wasn't given the tools to handle what the other person rolled up, and that could potentially be feels bad for a certain kind of player. Again, I go into sealed knowing that can happen and kind of just
accepting
accepting it, letting go of those feelings, because I know that can happen. But I could totally understand and see the kind of player who's like, nope, I want to play constructed. I want 100 iterations on my deck that I've had. I want to know exactly what I'm going in at. I want to know the general theme of what people are playing in the meta today, and I just want to go unprepared like that. I get that. I think it's super fun to sit down at a table, crack a pack, and say, all right, these are the tools I was given. How am I going to try to win this tournament?
Yeah, and two things that I would kind of throw back at that sentiment, and I agree with you that it exists. There's a non-zero chance that you lose some agency because of the cards you pack, or the pack that you opened. But there's also a non-zero chance in constructed that you play against the thing that has all the answers against you. So the chance is a little higher in sealed, of course.
Absolutely.
I do enjoy.
But it's still there in constructed.
Yeah. Yep. And I do enjoy trying to solve the puzzle. Like, if you're about to lose a match in the next turn, like, essentially you can do all the things to just hang on for one more turn, but you've already lost the game. I am going to hang on to that last turn, because you never know. Like, there's a chance. And so I like solving that puzzle. So even if I go in, down a leg up in sealed, it's still enjoyable to play that match to me.
Yes, for sure. That's the kind of poker player I am, actually. I usually swing big in the first several hands, and then after that, I'm just living blind to blind, trying to skimp along.
It either worked and you're leaning on everybody, or you're coming back from the behind, huh?
That's exactly it. Either I'm muscling people down with my big chip lead because I want some early hands, or I'm absolutely scraping by trying to make that. The tournaments I played, there's been some kind of a top cut or prizes for top 3 or something like that, and I've been just trying to limp along for that while other people swing at each other.
Well, I do want to jump over and just talk sealed adaptive really quick, which is a
Yeah.
concept that was used in Keyforge, has been kind of brought to the table by Eric Justice Blinded on the Discord. Essentially, it's hey, when you play sealed, everything's normal. You crack your packs, you build your deck, you show up, but against every opponent, when you sit down, you get to each review each other's decks, and then essentially decide if you guys both want to play the same deck. So if one is better than the other, and then you get a bid on your starting life points. So say one player says, I want to start at 45. The other goes, well, I'm going to start at 44. And then the other player backs out and says, yep, that's fine. You can play that deck, but you're starting at a 6 health deficit. I was able to try this out at a local tournament. We had, I think, a pretty good time. I do think it added another facet of the game that rewarded additional pieces of skill and knowledge for the game. But I'm just curious on your thoughts. How do you perceive sealed adaptive?
I don't know that that's my favorite way to adapt sealed. The reason being is just I don't like the result of losing the health. Like, I'm totally fine with bidding on health, but I'd much rather it be like, here are my 4 decks. I want to play these 2, and then you do something else with it. I like the banning concept actually potentially the most, where each player gets to ban 1 from their pool. And move forward with that. Mm-hmm. So you know it does require more sleeves, because you'd have to sleeve up the other options. But I do like coming to the table with 3 and then having 1 get banned. I do like that, and I actually think crafting in that sense is more skillful, because you have to make sure that any combination of your 3 at least work on some level. And then you can't just roll through a tournament. If you do high roll with 1, somebody's going to easily identify, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a boogeyman, like the Shambling Shambler or Triple Shambling deck, right? That's going to get banned, that, so you're going to do the rest of them. Or maybe somebody doesn't ban it, and then you get to play it. But I like that method.
That's interesting, too, because every match you may be having to develop different play lines because you have a different half deck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, like I said, it does require another set of 30 sleeves, so that you can sleeve 3 options and be ready to shuffle up at a moment's notice. But I mean, a standard pack of Dragon Shields is 100, so that's totally fine. A standard pack gets you exactly what you need. I do also like, and this is something that Church and I have been tossing around locally for a while, basically since set 1 was released, is I think sealed is an excellent way to play a league that's like monthly or quarterly, and you can develop your deck pool along the course of the league. So you would basically open up, let's say it's an 8-person league, you would open up 2 boosters a couple weeks into the league, and then it's just a reverse draft on boosters based on what the current standards are. So, or standings are rather. So the last player would get first pick out of that fresh 8-deck pool, and they'd be able to add that to their collection, their mini collection for the league, and play from there. I always thought that concept was super fun. We've just never had a group that was large enough or could meet regularly enough to make it work.
That does sound fun. So you've heard it here first. The charge-plated additive sealed league coming to an internet near you soon.
Yes. I mean, it could work digitally, to be honest. And then people just, maybe get their physical decks at the end of the whole league, along with any prizes. I know Shuffle Bus did that sealed, where everything was digital to begin with, and then at the end of it, they shipped out your deck. So it could be a league that would work actually to do digitally and then get physical decks later. I was just thinking, I mean, part of the hurdle initially was that basically every time we were having somebody come out and play a seal tournament locally, it was $30. And there was just no way people were doing that every week. And it was even starting to get difficult to get people to do it every month, because they had other games that they were investing money into. So we were trying to find a way to do a lower threshold, kind of sealed style, but still get to develop your stuff moving forward and collect some decks, but again, not have that $30 payout every time you show up to the game store.
No, I really like that concept. That would be pretty fun to try. But then, so I do want to bring up a thought for you here. So sealed adaptive was kind of like a potential answer to competitive sealed, not just sealed, because sealed is great as it is for local play, other than the cost, which you did mention there. So this idea would be cost prohibitive, I believe, essentially. But for a competitive sealed format, I'm calling it a limited common pool. And so let's say you have 8 players, then that means everyone gets access to, and this is probably an online only thing to start until, if it became big enough, Stoneblade could print decks. But essentially, everyone gets access to the same 8 boosters. So you don't just get your booster, right? There's 1 booster per player, but it's all a common pool, but still limited because it's 1 per player. So everyone gets to look through, that would be 32 half decks, and they get to make their pair. And if, one player chooses the same half deck as another, that's okay. That could happen. I do think you have to have the numbers high enough so that it's not an extremely common occurrence that everyone's playing the same half decks. So for 8 players, 32 half decks, I don't think you're going to run into that often. But,
for sure not.
What are your thoughts on something of that nature?
So everyone has access to all the decks, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. As long as it was a large enough pool, I think that's okay. One of the things I was most excited about with this game that coming from previous TCGs I was not a fan of is mirror matches. I despise mirror matches. I just don't really think there's a good feeling for mirror matches. I think very rarely do you feel like you truly outskilled your opponent in a mirror match. And a lot of times you're like, well, we're playing the same deck and I drew my win cons and they didn't draw, like, I guess our win cons really. And so sometimes it does feel very draw dependent and not as skill dependent. So as long as it's not like there's maybe 4 obviously super strong decks that people are gravitating towards and it's just a jumble between those on what people are going to specifically play. If it's a large enough pool and a balanced pool, which for something competitively I think you would craft the pool as such potentially, that you could do that. But again, in that future where you have a balanced pool, relatively speaking, you just have different flavors and you have a nice diversity amongst that, and everyone had the same opportunity to play the same decks. I do love that idea as far as leveling the playing field, because then at the end of the day somebody can't be like, well, you had that great deck, it's like you could have picked it too, so why that's no longer like an excuse or an out for not performing. You had that opportunity, and if you didn't see that connection when you selected your deck, that's on you.
Yeah, and I don't want to take credit for coming up with this idea, so I'm going to give credit where credit's due. ML Vanby ran an online tournament with 1 booster and a bunch of people, and there was a lot of mirror matches, but I really love the concept and just kind of thought about that. It's like, well, what if we increase the number of half decks?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so that was a very good discussion on Sealed. I really appreciate it. I always love hearing your insight. I did want to talk just a couple of other things in our time here tonight, and that's really like, what do you think the world's meta is going to look like? I think a lot of our viewers are very interested. Give me what you would say is just a snapshot of what you expect to see at Gen Con.
Yeah, this one's tough. I think it's tough because I think the meta kind of contracted around the TCG Con events, but it does feel like it's expanding back out now again. I do see more diversity in the online tournaments. A lot of these online tournaments I'm playing in are people who are trying to silver their decks for Worlds, and playing against a lot of the players that we're going to see there in Indy for Worlds itself. So I guess I'm optimistically hopeful that it's going to expand back out. But I think as far as archetypes, there's some that we're for sure going to see. You're going to see your Necria Mutera decks. Now, I don't think we're going to see a lot of Darkforge Drain decks. I've seen a ton of people over the last several months here trying to emulate Greg's deck with Darkforge Drain, and it just seems like no one can quite get it done the way he can. So I don't think we're going to see that kind of copycat or mirror style deck there, but I do think we're going to see a decent amount of life gain. Now, what kind of flavor of life gain, if it's Shamblers or Dark Hearts or whatever, but I do think we're going to see life gain in the Necria Mutera side. I think that's inevitable, and that's going to get played. There's a lot of minions that go along with that as well, and I think that's going to come up. So I think you're going to see a good amount of Necria Mutera, but I'm really hoping it's not as much as we saw in the previous events. And I do think that we're going to see some Rumble Spark decks. Not sure exactly how many, but I do think we're going to see Rumble Spark make an emergence again. Not maybe a ton of decks, but I guess at Indy, TCG Con Indy, there wasn't a ton of decks there either. So I guess a snapshot, that's kind of the snapshot of why I feel very strongly that I'm going to see. Is those two options there, is a decent amount of Necria Mutera, hopefully not, again, an overwhelming amount, and then some of that Rumble Spark, Dark Heart combinations, and then probably a smattering of other things, maybe a little Mages kicked in there, some replacement synergy, who knows.
Okay, nice. Hey, I have one question for you here. Is Krogius back?
Back to where he was before? No. Back into relevancy? I think so. And I think, metas have these push and pull to them where something's strong and then something comes up to match it or take it on directly. And then that becomes strong. And, in certain metas, you would never play aggro burn down. And in some metas, you would never play like some long con game like Crocus, right? I do think the meta is kind of starting to wrap back around where people are, I don't know, maybe selfish is the wrong word, but I think they're getting a little selfish with their plays. They're really focused on their plays. Life gain is a good example of that. I'm playing my cards to gain life and to profit from that, whether that's with free plays or boosting up my own things. Or I'm playing big Oak Fathers, like that's what I'm doing. And I think that Krogius can answer back to that pretty well, because it basically says, well, as long as I stay till cycle 3, I just throw this big thing down and you can't answer it, and there's nothing big enough on your side that's going to answer it. And I think that's great. Whereas previously we were seeing a lot of Tempest burn down, and Krogius was not doing well in that scenario.
Right.
It just wasn't living long enough. So I think since we've gone far enough away from the burn down and now into more of that Necrom Utera style, that Krogius is starting to chip away at that piece of pie and taking a larger stake in the overall pool. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll start out with a famous quote here that when I think of the meta is what I think of, and you encapsulated it. Basically, it's the dark rises and the light to meet it, right?
Yeah.
And so when you have something take hold of the meta, then its counter is eventually going to come back, right? And I think you're right that Krogius was the big bad. It ran the meta for a little bit, honestly. And then as something pushed out its enemy, like the thing that was beating it was the burn down aggro, let's finish the game before cycle 3 decks. And then I think it's two things, right? Life gain or sustain. I call them sustain decks, or basically I'm going to hold out, and get to cycle 3, 4. Really just pushed out the burn down aggro decks a little bit. And so just like you said, Krogius is rising back up to kind of combat that. But I think the other thing is before we had maybe a limited amount of decks out there in the open, right? And there wasn't decks that could do both. I think we're going to see the rise of sustained Krogius decks. So decks that easily last till cycle 3 without a second thought, and then have the chance to let Krogius win them the game.
Well, that's always the coolest part of meta evolutions, is that when something comes back around, it's not the same. It's changed since the last time you saw it. So in this instance, the last time that we saw Krogius, it was sell out for cycle 3, sometimes even cycle 4. Some people were playing Army Commander at cycle 4 with no Mantis or Forge Seal seen to try to cheat it out early. They were just selling out for that cycle 4 free Krogius play without ever playing Krogius before. And I had spoken out previously on this of saying you can't just bank on that 75% of drawing him in cycle 4 and lasting until then. If that's your only win condition, like, you need something else going on here. And I completely agree with you. More decks have been opened. I just picked up in a recent sale in Utera and an Aloyan. The Utera had Krogius, and the Aloyan I think is going to work really well with a Krogius deck. And combined, they were $25. Whereas I think previously people would see that combination and it would have been, a much higher dollar value, just because relative to the pool that was open, it was more valuable. So with more decks being open, more options available to people, you can fine tune things a little better. And just overall as a community, I think we've learned since then. I think we've learned about what can put big creatures out, what can be consistent, and then building decks around that new knowledge.
Right. Yeah. $25 for what I think I've seen this one is a competitive deck, and that's pretty impressive. So get out there and get your undervalued Krogi and Aloyan decks now. You mentioned Rumble Spark before. I am confident that there will be Rumble Spark at Worlds, because the way I've kind of put Rumble Spark in my head is that it's a glass cannon, and if you can high roll through however many rounds of a tournament, then you have a chance to win it. Even the best ones and even the worst ones, right? The best ones get a little bit more consistent, and the worst ones are higher risk to play. I think Rumble Spark's been out long enough that we're going to see the more consistent ones make its way to Worlds. And I think it was Shadow on your guys' podcast said, hey, if you can't make the best life gain or sustain deck, why would you bring the 5th best to Worlds? when you could do something else. And I think Rumblespark is going to be that something else. Have your thoughts evolved on Rumblespark since your last episode, where you guys really went into depth on Rumblespark?
Probably. I don't 100% remember what I said on that episode or what I'm sure I had some hot takes built in there. But I have played against it a lot more since then, so my thoughts have probably progressed since then. I struggle. Your explanation of Glass Cannon, I agree with, but I don't agree with the phrasing of Glass Cannon, just because I come from games like League of Legends, where Glass Cannons are just super powerful builds that have like no defense. And I don't think that's what Rumblespark is. I do think it's very swingy, though. I think at high rolls or low rolls, I think it's kind of your gambler's deck, where you're always pushing for hoping for that high roll or that great shuffle. Because once it gets its components out, and if it can keep them out, and its components all have, level 1 Dark Art, and the Rumblespark embodiment as it comes out is an 8 health creature. So both of them are 8 health. They're not like fragile. They're not a level 1 Grove Mother. They're going to stay around for a decent amount of time. And so I don't know. I see it as more of a gambler style deck. And as with any deck like that has a large variation, what I think you absolutely have to do is you have to find ways to raise the performance floor of your deck while trying to maintain as much of the ceiling as you can. So for me, if I was going to construct one of those, construct in air quotes, of course, in Solforge, I would be looking for components that are going to be consistent game to game when I don't see Nova Elementalist and when I don't see Dark Heart Sorcerer. So if I don't see those two components, I need the rest of my deck to play together well to give me some kind of a competitive advantage, and overall to hopefully get me a couple of wins that I wouldn't otherwise have. Because whenever we're talking about a competitive tournament, I mean, you're talking 4 or 5 rounds of Swiss play minimum. You've got to string together 3 to 4 wins in there to get you a chance to get into the top cut, and you're not even guaranteed at that point with opponent win percentages. So those are my thoughts on it. You still need a strong deck around it. It's kind of like Krogius, where if you don't draw it, you really, really need other things in your deck that are going to carry you to some wins.
Yeah, and I agree 100% when you're constructing any deck, but especially these that oftentimes you want to try to raise the floor as high as you can while keeping the ceiling as theoretically as high as you can. One thing is a piece of advice I think that I actually picked up from Church that I want to give out to the community. Sorry for selling trade secrets, but to do that type of testing specifically, if you have a Rumblespark deck, one time you play it, take Dark Heart out of your deck and play with a 19 card deck. The next time, take Nova out and see how your deck responds, because what you're doing is, yes, you have removed the ceiling theoretically in your deck, but you've also ensured you're going to test the floor. So that's one thing that I've picked up and I've been using for a lot of my decks. If I think there's a pivotal card in my deck, I'll take it out and play the game and see how it goes in my testing. And so it's always a fun thing to do. In TTS, it's super easy. If you're playing against someone, just tell them, hey, I'm going to delete my Dark Card from my deck. Are you okay with that? And I've done it before. People are totally fine with that.
That's a great bit of advice. I've done the exact same thing, actually, with the deck that I brought to Denver. In formulating that deck, I basically played a bunch of the options without my Shambling Shambler to see how it did without it. Because my theory was, well, a level 3 Shambling Shambler is going to have success as long as there's combat occurring. So take that out, make sure the rest of your deck plays well together, and then build off of that. So yeah, a lot of the R&D I did on that deck was with the Shambling Shambler out of the deck, and I've done it previously with Krogius decks or some other things that were pivotal. I think another good example of that is like Dino decks. If you can have your deck do well without the Patriarch or the Rex, then odds are you have a pretty solid deck on your hands.
Yeah, I've tried that with dinos, and it's very difficult.
Oh, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. It's so funny because the community at large, small tangent here, the community at large seems to all want to play dinos because it's such a fun concept, but just everyone has kind of come to the consensus that it's not consistent enough to win, but when it does win, it's so much fun to play.
It is. I mean, I have some dino decks that I have literally blown the socks off of. What I know are 2 of the better decks in competitive circulation, but it only does that 1 out of 10 times,
Exactly.
Exactly. Hey, Cody, I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said, you know, you're one of the minds that I really respect in Solforge Fusion. You have a lot of great opinions, formulated thoughts. You know, a lot of people, myself included, sometimes will just throw out some unformulated thoughts and opinions, and then kind of like build the body of evidence behind that thought in motion. Like as the car's going, I'm slapping wheels on it. I feel like every time that you come to the table, you have, you know, evidence A, B, and C, why you have an opinion you have, is another thing I really appreciate. So all that to say, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing some wisdom. You know, and I look forward to sometime down the future, you know, this game's longevity. We'll do this again, I hope.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on, and thanks for everything that you do for the community. I think the Forgeborn Finishing School is an absolutely wonderful asset to the community at large, and I know I've gleaned a lot of things from your episodes, so thanks for putting in all the time that you do to get these episodes out.
All right, with that, until next time. Thanks for attending this lesson of the Forgeborn Finishing School. If you liked this video, please subscribe, comment, or consider donating to our Patreon account. I'm Kckid, and I look forward to our next lesson.